Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the San Carlos City Council and successor agency to the Redevelopment Agency special meeting. Would you please rise and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, well, we're going to start with public comment. Persons wishing to address the City Council on matters not on the posted agenda may do so. Each speaker is limited to 2 minutes. If the item you're speaking on is not listed on the agenda, please be advised that the Council may briefly respond to statements made or questions posed as allowed under the Brown Act. The Council's general policy is to refer items to staff for attention or have the matter placed on a future City Council agenda for a more comprehensive action or report in a formal discussion and input at that time. And I don't see any public at the moment to comment. So we are now actually going to go to closed session. And before we do that, come on up, Matt. And do I need to read this item for the record, into the record, the closed session item?
The title of the item? Just the title.
Just the title. So this would be Conference of Real Property Negotiators, Volpe, Mattis, Savay, Simon, Vista Del Gran, LLC, and VDG View Real Estate, LLC. Is that adequate? All right. And we will reconvene at 7 p.m. In just a minute, we're just waiting on another council member who will join us momentarily. All right, we are reconvening. We had stepped out for a closed session. At the suggestion of Mr. Gosili, and I tend to agree, there was nobody here when I asked for public comment before on items not on tonight's agenda. So, is there anybody who would like to talk about something that's we're not talking about tonight, something that's other than tonight's single issue on the agenda? And if you would like to speak, please come on up. 2 minutes. You can fill out a card later. Oh, come on up. It's fine. As long as it's not about Black Mountain, that's fine. If it's about Black Mountain, then we're going to have an opportunity for people to talk. Okay, come on up.
Could you come up to the microphone?
Yeah, come up to the microphone, please.
Come to the microphone.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Just
come right over here. The other side. Thank you, sir.
Speaking to you or them?
You're speaking to us.
My question is this. The Frank Harrington Park, is that still going to have his name on it?
Yes, that ceremony happens a week from today.
Oh, it did already happen?
It will happen.
Oh.
It hasn't happened yet.
Okay.
Yeah, next Thursday morning, 11 o'clock.
I'm glad to
10
hear
o'clock.
that. I was a classmate of him.
It's 10 o'clock next Thursday, the 16th, at what is currently Laurel Street Park across from Bank of America.
Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Okay. Now moving on to council communications and announcement.
Report from closed session.
Oh, I apologize. Yes. Report from closed session?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There was no reportable action from closed session.
All right. Thank you. Okay, now on to council communications and announcements. This is where council members will mention brief items that they have participated in, upcoming events, community correspondence that they've received, things that they've, activities that we've participated in. They're informal in nature. We don't take any action on them. We don't take any action on these items. So why don't we start with Matt?
Mr. Mayor, I don't have anything, but I would like us to do the pledge.
We did do the pledge.
Oh,
I
I'm sorry.
apologize. You were walked in right after it.
Okay, so we won't redo it. Okay.
Okay.
Well, I've got nothing then.
Okay, great. Bob?
I have nothing tonight, Mr. Mayor.
All right. Mark?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just one brief item. I had an opportunity to participate with several staff members and probably almost 24 community members talking about their traffic safety concerns in San Carlos, and staff has picked a number of items up that they're going to follow up on working for that. But I just wanted to bring it to our collective attention. I think it's pretty clear to me that there's a growing concern about traffic safety for a variety of reasons in San Carlos, and this may very well be something that rather than having staff hold one-off meetings on with particular groups of concerned citizens, personally I think it may be something we want to task the TNC, the Traffic and Circulation Commission, with perhaps looking into and holding some hearings on to come up with some proposals on how we could improve things.
All right. Is that, you want to make that an agenda item?
Certainly, sure.
All right. Anybody else agree? Matt?
Are we, so, but you're asking that it be sent to the commission, is that right? So it's not, it wouldn't be on our agenda?
Something we're going to just
I was presuming the reason the mayor was asking to put it on the agenda so that the council could officially act on asking the commission to look at it.
Right.
All I really want to do is have the commission begin
Right,
looking at it.
yeah.
So we don't need to have
I'm in
an
favor of
item
that,
on
yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Through,
All right.
through the chair, I have no problem either. Could I ask my colleague, what meeting was this? That wasn't aware of? Or?
Oh, no, you know what, Bob? I don't know exactly why the contact was made to me, but there was some, probably because I had been involved in an earlier, smaller scale meeting. There was a resident up on Devonshire who had reached out to me, and I had helped him set up a meeting with staff and then participated in what I was actually surprised at the number of people who were in the room when I came in. Because, yeah.
All right. So specific, you're just asking for a report.
And yes, and to have staff work with TNC to work on holding some public hearings and do some brainstorming on things that we might do to improve traffic safety.
Okay. All right. All right. Anything else, Mark?
No, Mr. Mayor, that's it.
All right. Cameron?
I have nothing tonight.
All right. And I'll have a few items, but I think I'll save those for Monday night. Okay. Any staff comments on city administrative business?
None this evening, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. All right, we're now going to move on to our report to council item 7A. This is a report on and consideration of the scientific voter survey results and a potential bond measure to purchase Black Mountain properties for a park. And I think, Elaine, are you going to start off?
I am going to start. Honorable Mayor, members of the council, my name is Elaine Costello, and I'm the Special Projects Director. And we're here tonight to give you a report on the results of a scientific survey that was done on a potential bond measure to purchase Black Mountain properties for a park. Just some background on this. In January, the council launched an outreach effort to determine the community's desires for new projects and the willingness to support a revenue measure to fund the projects. Protecting Black Mountain from development and creating a park has emerged as one of the top priorities. But the results of that early work between January and February also showed that the community was not familiar with the location and the opportunities that Black Mountain had to offer. The map of Black Mountain is up on the board, and it's on the Alameda between Madera and Melody Lanes. It's about approximately 25 acres. So the council then authorized additional community outreach in March and another scientific voter survey, which is what we'll hear tonight, to continue to explore the idea of purchasing Black Mountain properties. Since March, the city has undertaken an extensive outreach process to provide information about the properties and opportunities for people to visit it. This outreach has, This outreach has included 3 community preview events on the site, which more than 600 people attended, far exceeding our expectations. And booths at Hometown Days, San Carlos Airport Day, and monthly at the Farmers Market. Presentations to over 14 community groups and service clubs, 3 informational mailers, and online information, including a web page and a Facebook page. We also solicited some qualitative feedback. So there were online surveys for attendees at the community preview events. A mailer was sent out in June to all registered voters. We have had over 1,000 people respond and submit that survey. And then we've also had a short survey on the online Shape San Carlos topic. But all those surveys are subjective. They're the people who choose to complete a survey. And they provide very valuable information, but the council also wanted a scientific voter survey to gain objective scientific information about voter support for the purchase of Black Mountain and a potential bond measure. And with us here tonight are Brian Godby of Godby Research and Jared Boygan of TBWB to talk about the results of that survey. So there's no action tonight, but on Monday night, there will be several items on the council agenda, including an item where the council would be considering a resolution of necessity and an ordinance to call for an election on the potential bond measure to purchase and improve Black Mountain properties. And at that same meeting, the council will be considering an ordinance that will also is an essential part of calling for that election. If the ordinance is adopted, then the ballot paperwork would be submitted to the county by Friday, August 7th for a November 3rd election. So that's the background, and now I'm going to ask Brian Godby to go over the results of the survey with you, and unless you have any questions. So
Any questions for Elaine?
we'll have Brian
All right.
and then Jared.
Thank you, Elaine. Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Actually, Jared's going to join me and make comment as we go through this and answer any questions that you might have as well. So as Elaine said, we conducted a scientific survey, and the purpose really was to look at the potential support for a bond measure now that we've refined what the needs might be. That included testing support and opposing arguments, as well as projects and programs to be funded. There's also, of course, a variety of demographics that goes along with any scientific survey. The methodology was a telephone and internet online survey, as it was before. The universe was slightly different this time because now San Mateo County is going to be embarking on a demonstration project to try an all-mail ballot format. So that's a little bit larger turnout than we might have been looking at for a traditional polling place election in an off year. We were in the field from June 7th through June 15th. The average telephone survey was 18 minutes long. We completed 601 interviews of that universe of likely November 15 all-mail ballot voters, and that gives us an error rate of plus or minus 3.85%. Jumping into the data and right into our first ballot question, which you see in the box on the right-hand side of the slide, and that approximates what could actually be on the ballot. It meets all the legal standards and requirements for a ballot question. Most importantly is that it can't exceed 75 words. So we read that to the respondents on the phone, or the respondents in the online surveys read it to themselves. And then we asked them, would you vote definitely, probably, yes, probably no, or definitely no, or we're not sure. And you can see here 65% when we aggregate the definitely and probably yeses said yes. And the way we look at feasibility is to aggregate the yes and no. There's, of course, no probably yes on the ballot, and you have to make a choice one way or the other. On the other side, we've got 26% that were no and 9% that are undecided. And given that all they know about the measure is just what you see in this box at this point in the survey, that's a pretty good place to start, because obviously we're very, very close to the 66.7% that we need to be successful. The next set of questions was a variety of supporting statements, and we asked all of these in a random order. So we asked the respondents these. They didn't suggest these to us in an open-ended format. These are actually summaries of those because they wouldn't fit on the slide otherwise. And when we read the item to them. By law, all the money must stay in San Carlos and be used only for these purposes. Does that make you much more likely, somewhat more likely, or does it have no effect on your likelihood to vote for this measure that we had on the previous slide? We then go back and assign the numeric values that you see across the bottom of the slide, 2, 1, 0, and that gives us a scale that's very nuanced and able to rank the priority of all these statements. The good news is all of these statements on this particular slide are very highly ranked. They're all in the 60s. The lowest one is actually 64%, so we're in the mid-60s up to the high 60s, and they're all really statistically tied with the error rate that we talked about earlier, and also the error rate that we apply to this particular ranking. There are some numeric differences, but really they're all tied, and that's good because there's a lot of things to work with. At the top of that list, again, by law, the money must stay in San Carlos. Second was purchasing Black Mountain would create a tranquil walking paths, etc. If it doesn't pass, Black Mountain could be purchased by a developer. And the fourth is Black Mountain includes some of the last remaining undeveloped residential area property in town. And fifth, purchasing Black Mountain will prevent it from being developed. There's a variety more. I won't read all of them, but they're all very good. Did you have a comment on that?
Yes, briefly. Thanks, Brian. Jared Boygan with TBWB. I just want to point out two other themes on this slide that were kind of interesting to us as we were looking through the survey. The first is kind of falls in the middle, that a theme that seems to be resonating with residents is the idea that with so much development and congestion on the peninsula, it's nice to balance that with the opportunity to preserve open space when you have it. And that idea seemed to resonate, actually kind of percolated to the top quite a bit, especially as Brian and I did more analysis of the subgroups and demographics in the survey. And then the other is an idea that I think is consistent. It's kind of developed from staff and leaders throughout this process, but this has been as I'll talk about in a minute, an incredibly transparent, highly publicly engaged process. And the theme that you see towards the bottom of the slide, but as Brian said, statistically very similar to everything on the slide, is that if the measure is approved by voters, the city will appoint a citizens committee to create a plan for the park, meaning that decisions aren't being made behind closed doors and aren't final choices made yet. And that's actually very appealing to voters. And I think it's normally, Brian and I don't see that kind of process type question be as high on a list of priorities for voters as it is in this survey. And I think it's because the amount of transparency that you've had so far, there's a point later in the survey where he's going to show you an incredibly large number of people who already are familiar or say that they're familiar with this issue because of all the outreach you've done. I think that they're interested by that process. They like and appreciate the process, and they look forward to the opportunity to continue that process, if in fact voters approve it, that they would be continuing, transparency before any final decisions are made about exactly, what the park looks like.
So moving on to the next set of questions, this too was a list that was asked in a random order, and then a little bit different though. We read the particular feature of the park and then said, or of the project, and then said, does that make you more or less likely to support the measure? It's sub-segmented into much more likely, somewhat more likely. Same on the negative side. You can see the scale is a little bit different here. So it's 2, 1, 0, -1, -2. So we can't compare these scores directly with the previous slide, but it still provides us the ability to have a very nuanced ranking. At the top of this list in Tier 1, we have the measure will protect the local water source at Black Mountain, will save money, and also it will protect and preserve the last remaining open space in San Carlos. Those are in the mid-60s to low 70s when we look at percentages, and so very highly ranked. The second tier is also very positive. It ranges from the low 60s down to 57% at the bottom of this, but those are still all positive. Again, protecting the water source in a drought, creating public park at Black Mountain. Purchasing Black Mountain includes purchasing last undeveloped open space in San Carlos, maintaining the scenic beauty of San Carlos, and reducing fire danger. We're all highly rated. So after we talked about the project a little more and added some meat to the bones, we then came back and asked them the same ballot question that we had at the outset, and looked to see if there was a change. There was a slight change. We're now up to 65.8%. That would round to 66%. So we're very close, very, very close to the 2/3 level that we need to be at. Although clearly we're not at that level, but it is a very stable level of support that we're seeing at the 65-66% level from the beginning to the end. And as Jared alluded to earlier, we asked a final question, which was, have you seen or heard anything about Black Mountain? And then if you'll remember back to when we talked about this, the needs and priority survey back in the winter, when we asked about Black Mountain in that survey, at least in the online portion, many people, more than just one or two, emailed us back and said, where's Black Mountain? So they didn't actually know, even though you might think they would. But with all the outreach that you've done and the transparency, we asked the question of them rather than the other way around, and 86% said that they are aware of Black Mountain or seen and heard something about it. So that's an overwhelming portion of this particular audience. In terms of summary, then, we're at a very solid and stable place, very, very close to the 2/3 level. There are error rates on surveys. Could be up, we could be above it, we could be a little bit lower, but we're very, very close. And that's at the 65.4 and then 65.8 on the final test. The information that garnered 2/3 support, or more likely to get 2/3 support, where the following: Black Mountain includes some of the last remaining undeveloped residential areas in San Carlos and must be protected. Purchasing Black Mountain will create tranquil walking paths, trails, recreation, and park space in San Carlos. By law, all funds in this measure must stay in San Carlos and be used only for these specific purposes that we're discussing. And it would, again, protect the local water source at Black Mountain. So that's the conclusion of my presentation. I'm certainly happy to answer any questions you might have.
Bob, you have Bob, you have some questions?
I just had one question. Brian, on the 601, the sample size,
Right.
how many were phone and how many were internet?
Let me look that up. I've got that on paper, but not on the top of my head. It was 430 online and 171 phone.
Thank you.
That's it. All right. Matt?
So if I am understanding the error statistic properly, that would mean that you've given us a figure of 65.4%, but that could go as low as 61.5% for it, or it could go as high as 69% for it. Okay.
All right. Cameron?
Hi, Brian. I think most of us on the dais know you, but for the benefit of the public, can you talk about what your firm is and what kind of polling you do, and how many polls of this type have you done in the area?
Sure. We are located in San Mateo. We are the only pollster located in San Mateo County. I was born and raised here. And we have specialized in my 30-year career in doing surveys for municipal governments, county governments, and school districts, and some of those are resident satisfaction and needs assessment surveys, but the vast majority of them are revenue-related surveys, so they're bond measures or sales taxes or school parcel taxes, et cetera. And we've literally done thousands of these in 30 years.
And given all that experience, how would you characterize, 65% at sort of the start of a potential campaign?
I think it's a very stable place to be, and it's a very solid place to be. I think if we were talking about would this pass in a large county, we might be a little more cautious. But in a smaller community, given the error rates and given the enthusiasm that we've seen that Elaine described earlier, I think it's easy to envision this being successful.
Great. One of the things that I think is interesting about the survey results is there's a theme of wanting to create more recreation space, and there's also a theme of wanting to protect open space from new housing being developed. Do you see those as separate different voters? Those are different priorities for different voters, and which of those themes do you think is more salient with the public in San Carlos?
Well, I think that the survey data, and we can go back and look at the arguments, preserve is a theme that's at the top. These are all statistically, there's not that much difference, so I don't want to make too big a difference out of any of them. But purchasing Black Mountain to create tranquil walking space, if it doesn't pass, it could be purchased by developer. I mean, it seems to lean a little bit at the top more toward the protecting and preserving. But again, statistically, there's not that much difference between the top and the bottom of this list.
Okay.
Yeah, if I might, council member, one thing we've seen in these results, and also in other work we've done on similar measures in the area, is that people have an affirmative appreciation for open space whether or not they see themselves personally using it. Mm-hmm. That there's something to the breaking up, just end-to-end development that is appealing to people and that they feel like is part of kind of their sense of place and where they live. And so, I don't know if I would tell you that they're different voters. I think they're different sides to some degree of the same coin, that you're creating affirmative, not necessarily opportunities to recreate, but open places, open spaces. Whether or not people enjoy themselves personally, they appreciate driving past something that's green, or knowing that there is, a break in the landscape, and that there's a place where there's wildlife and, clean air and stuff like that. And that they're appreciating and experiencing it, even if they're not out in it, with hiking shoes on. That's, and we see that in these survey results, and we've seen it in focus groups and other work we've done for similar agencies right here in this area with your voters and voters around here. So, and the flip side of that is, there definitely is a sense that you have to act affirmatively to do that. Otherwise, that's what happens. Open land gets developed, and when the economy gets hot again, as it's starting to do now or has been doing, land disappears, and there is a sense of that here, and so you're starting to see that in these poll results, and particularly the theme I mentioned earlier about balance between development and congestion versus open space. I think there's an interest and an eagerness that government has a role in helping to maintain that balance.
Great. Thanks.
Okay. Mark.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, gentlemen. Good presentation, as always. Brian, any either interesting or unusual insights into, let me call it kind of the demographic subsets in looking at the polling results?
I think that, whenever you're looking at a revenue measure, there's some typical things that you expect to see, and those are based on age and partisanship. And so those are, present slightly, although when you get to the 65% level, it's hard to add up to 65 if everybody isn't at 65. Yeah. So there aren't really big differences. There are some differences in what the preferences on this list are among those people that maybe softer yeses versus harder yeses and that sort of thing, but nothing dramatic, really.
And Jared, sort of, I guess, putting you on the spot a little bit here, with the final survey results coming in at 65.8 plus or minus. Obviously, it would be nicer to be over 2/3 to start with, from the point of view of if one is looking to be successful in this. You've done an awful lot of these campaigns, participated in them and whatnot. What's your reaction to this?
Well, I think it's positive. I mean, there's been an incredible amount of interest in transparency in this process, and a lot of times when you have this kind of interest and excitement around a ballot measure or particularly a tax measure, that is going to create downward momentum because people will start to they'll think on first blush, maybe this wasn't, this was interesting to me, but then as I kind of got closer to it, I didn't think so. But we are not seeing that here. We're seeing an unbelievable sustained interest. I mean, you've got about 17,000 registered voters in town, and about 1,700 people have participated in one form or another, either by going to an open house or filling out an online survey or responding to one of Brian's phone calls. That's 10%. I mean, that's an unbelievable statistic of public engagement. You're kind of getting me ahead of myself to the slides I'm about to speak to, but normally with that level of public engagement and public interest, we would see some softening, and you are not seeing softening. You're actually seeing it basically firm up at about 65% and change who really like the idea, and about 26% and change who don't, that's a pretty good ratio, I think, for a proposal, even considering the 2/3 threshold.
Fair enough, thank you. And actually, I'm glad you highlighted some of the things in there too about the transparency, because I think I know we've done this in the past, but I would personally also like to thank staff for all the effort that they've put into doing this. I know that it was a joint effort, council direction and whatnot, but a lot of times, to Jared's point, there's an instinctive feeling that government inherently is done behind closed doors, and actually I think this is a really good example of how you can in fact do it in the open, and that it's often a very productive thing to do it exactly that way. So thank you, staff, for all the time and effort you put into this.
All right, thanks, Mark. Bob, you had another question?
Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Did you talk about dollars? In other words, what the folks would say, I'll pay $500, I'll pay $2, I'll pay $3, or whatever?
Yeah, a bond measure is the 75 words is, and I'll go back to that, doesn't actually require the specific amount that you would pay. What it does require is that there's the total amount that you have bonding authorization, so that's in here at $45 million in the ballot question. Now, the voter handbook has additional information. It's not in terms of how much any taxpayer would pay. It's a formula. It's a tax rate, and that's per 100,000. So people have to do the math themselves because we don't know how much their property is worth. We did test that, and it works in the conjunction with the survey data that we have here. I'm sorry, you said you didn't? No, we did. We did. We just don't have that data here in the presentation today.
But I can speak to it briefly. Okay. We have asked both in this survey and in the online survey, a range of tax rates from as high as $40 per 100,000 down to about $20 or I think $19. And the consistent indication we've gotten is that obviously people are comfortable with it if we can get it down to that $20 range or even a touch below. In the sort of online mass of 1,000 survey results we've collected, we got about 70+%. Elaine may have a number exactly. It was 74, 76% who liked it at the $20 range or lower as opposed to the $30 or $40 range. In the survey, I think we was up in the 60s, the low 60s or something like that for that same range, $19 or something like that. So, it's 45 million, and I don't know that it's going to be a lot lower than that. I know staff, to Mark's last point, has worked really hard to create a responsible and conservative financing plan that's minimal, and I think we're looking at something that's about that $19 to $20 range.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks.
Cameron, you had another question?
Yeah, I did. Just one more. Brian, can you remind us what the support was in the previous survey for purchasing Black Mountain?
That's a good question. I know I have it in the file folder back on my chair. I don't have it here, but I can look it up. It was just a 60, it was low 60s, so it's a little higher.
So if it was low 60s and now we're at 65, do you think that's a direct result of the community outreach and how would you characterize? And that, sorry, the previous survey was done in March or April. Is that right? Do you remember?
February. Yeah.
February. Okay, so
we're here in March. Yeah.
4 months, and we've gone up maybe 4 points in terms of support. Is that? Could you give us a little context on whether you've seen that kind of thing before? Do you expect that momentum to continue as people continue to talk about their neighbors and learn more about the project?
I think it is attributable to the information, and what I think really supports that from a quantitative perspective is that 86% that are now aware of Black Mountain, whereas before we were getting, albeit anecdotal, but we were getting queries for the online survey that was, where's Black Mountain? Mm-hmm. Which, as a lifelong resident of San Mateo County, I have an idea of where it was, but I didn't live in San Carlos, so I was a bit surprised at how many people weren't sure, but now in the second survey, how many people are sure.
Mm-hmm. And is there any reason to believe that number 65 is organically likely to grow, stay stable, go down?
Yeah, I think that's a function of the campaign,
mm-hmm.
and from my point of view, and I'll let Jared answer this as well, but if you're dealing with the state of California and you say, can the campaign move that number 1.5%, I would probably say no, because obviously it's a huge voter population. But we're not dealing with the state of California. We're dealing with 8,500 voters that we have to reach. And as Jared said, you've got 1,700 that are mobilized already and have been engaged in this process. So you've got a base of people to go out and reach out to other people throughout the campaign, and that makes all the difference in the world.
Okay, great. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Cameron. I just had a couple questions. Actually, I think Mark really asked it for me, but I may ask it in a different way. And I think maybe Cameron touched on it. But my question is this business of how many people are aware of an issue and what the level of support is. You said that there were, 86, nearly 86% of the people that you talked to were aware of this. Does a higher awareness of an issue necessarily translate into more positive support? Or have you seen cases where, there was a really high level of support and people just didn't like it? I mean, is this something that just lends itself to that?
I think it depends on what the issue is, and it depends on what the demographics of the community are. So, you can find places in Southern California or out in the valley that more support or more awareness will not lead to more support. Mm-hmm. But it also, again, depends on what the issue is and is it affordable and all of those details. I mean, it's not a one-to-one ratio about I know about it, I like it, or I know about it, I don't like it. It's how much is it, where's it going to be, what is it something I'm interested in? And I think in this case, all of those questions are answered in the affirmative. It is affordable. It is somewhere that they want it. It is something that they're looking for. So it's more about the details than it is just about the native awareness.
But I guess, can we assume that a higher level of support, a higher level of awareness, given the level of support we have, that getting that remaining 13-14% really isn't going to change that number very much, if we could get to 100%.
Yeah, I mean, 100%, well, we have 91% of the people that have an opinion about whether they're yes or no on the bond measure.
Right.
There's only not there, while there's 12% or so, 13% that are unaware of Black Mountain, there's a lower percentage that are undecided on Black Mountain. Right. So it's not necessarily a 1-to-1 ratio there either.
All right. Thank you both. Good presentation. Any other questions of these two gentlemen or of staff? Okay. Well, we are. I'm sorry, Jared. You had a couple more things you wanted to.
Very briefly,
Yes,
Mayor. Yeah, and
apologize.
we've talked about some of it already. Let's see. Am I going the wrong way? Oh, okay. Thank you. Okay. So some of this is summary, and as I mentioned, we've really talked about it. There's a strong and stable base of voter support for the ballot measure, for a ballot measure to appear on the ballot that would protect Black Mountain from development and create a park. As I noted, it's 65% and change, with an error rate, obviously, that are in favor of seeing this on the ballot and would support it, and about 26% and change that feel the other way, again, with an error rate involved. Is still a very, very positive ratio, and there's not very much variance throughout the survey, either based on the kind of themes we asked about or the level of support. Extremely high public interest and participation, and I mentioned it earlier, but I really want to emphasize it. This is what we do for cities and school districts and public agencies around the state, and everybody wants to be transparent and to have public interested in what they're doing. And I can't tell you how many hours and hours I've spent in conversation with city officials and other people. How can we get them to pay attention to this budget talks? These are important, and we want them to understand it, and we really want to engage. And you can have town hall meetings, you can have 3 people there, you can people spend an unbelievable amount of energy trying to get the average voter interested in what you're doing as a government agency, and to get 1,700 people in a community of 17,000 voters to participate in one form or another is just an unbelievable number. The idea here is really interesting to people. You could see it in the open houses. I think we were overwhelmed by the amount of attendance, the community previews, we were overwhelmed by the amount of people who showed up. I mean, it was, every time we had one, we're like, well, we better figure out a way to make more space for the next one, because people are really interested. They want to see this. They're curious about the property. The more they learn, neighbors heard about it. Oh, that's just right over here on Alameda. I want to go see it. So it really did start to snowball, and there was just a lot of it. And so there's a clear consensus that it is a top issue and potential opportunity for the city. And we saw this not just in this survey, but I want to do a little bit of what Elaine did, which is backtrack. The beginning, Shape San Carlos was very much open doors, come, we want to engage you, tell us what you think. We have a lot of, we hear a lot of ideas, we want to hear what you think about various ideas. From the very first sessions, Black Mountain emerged very strongly. I think the first couple of forums, there was like 96% of people who attended a Shape San Carlos discussion ticked off Black Mountain as something really exciting and interesting to pursue. And then, so we started to kind of focus on it a little bit more. Council kind of gave direction. Well, let's kind of narrow to this, because it seems like the one issue that really rises to the top that we agree should be a high priority. In the online surveys, we gave people kind of a 5-point scale about the interest in this issue. We've had over 1,000 people participate in these surveys. In the mid-70s, rate it a 1 or 2, with people in high 60s giving it a 1 out of a scale of 5 as being very important, something that they're personally very interested in. So, a huge amount of interest and a community-generated consensus. You started a listening process, and in the listening process, the community has been telling you, this is pretty interesting. We don't see this kind of thing come up a lot in a place like San Carlos. We kind of thought it was all developed or spoken for. Now here's an opportunity. This is interesting to us. And so I think fundamentally the big idea in front of people of, more homes, or, do we really have a chance to create a public park here? That idea has kind of taken root, and you're hearing it on the natural now, just kind of from people. And that's a very, it's an unusual, terrific if you're sort of a fan of democracy, right? With those of us in this business, we like to see people active and interested. But it's really, people have gotten interested, and there's a lot of talk about it out there. And we've seen it in I think the poll results reflect it.
All right, thank you. Any other questions before we hear any comments from the public? Yeah, go ahead.
So, Jared, I note from the handout that you had a couple other slides. Do you have the
sorry.
I just thought this was an interesting slide that was worth talking about.
I did.
Absolutely.
I forgot about that.
Thank you.
Yeah, staff had asked us to do, these are 3 other recent projects that are very relevant. We, in fact, worked on all 3 of these projects. The Mid-Peninsula Regional Open Space District, City of San Carlos entirely contained within it, had a bond measure on the June 2014 ballot. It was a 67% bond measure, so highly analogous to what you're doing here. Santa Clara Valley Open Space Authority, which is to the south, but is nearby and is also highly analogous topic. Open space parks as opposed to roads or schools or other things that they can be on the ballot. And then obviously the recent measure P parcel tax, the San Carlos School District had on the ballot in May. And so we wanted to show you what some of the pre-election polling was like relative to the election results in two-thirds environment. And it's worth noting, I think as Brian pointed out, in a bigger electorate, a statewide electorate or something, a small percentage means a large number of voters. Environment like this, a percentage doesn't mean as many voters. So the San Carlos School District, won by a full 1.5 points. That only translates to about 109 votes. So, a few number of votes kind of make a big difference in a two-thirds race in a smaller community. But the other thing that's interesting about this slide is that the open space measures really did achieve the top end of what their polling predicted they might be able to achieve. And they gained more ground than maybe you might have expected. It's rare to see, it's not unprecedented, but school districts measures don't often go up 5 or 6 points between polling and election day. People kind of understand what it's about, and then they kind of figure out where they are on it. But what we found with open space is that the polling often is a little bit, can be, and I'm not saying it is in this instance because your sense of awareness is already so high. I'm not sure that it is soft, but that because open space and parks is not always a top of mind issue like safety, jobs, and say the economy, schools, right? That sometimes people think of it as something that they care about, but that they wouldn't put it in their sort of most important, bushel of goods. But when confronted with a specific opportunity like this one to balance development and congestion and traffic with, hey, here's a nice opportunity to actually do something else, people tend to gravitate toward it. And so what we've seen, and I thought that trend was interesting, staff asked us to look into it, and we thought we'd share it tonight. Just that one. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions? And we've gone through all the slides.
That's it.
All right. I don't have any speaker slips, but if anyone would like to come and speak, you can always fill out a slip afterwards. But I guess not.
One in the back.
We do have one. Come on up.
Hi there. I came a little late. Sorry about that. And I'm sorry I missed the presentation. I actually came for another part of the meeting today. But I wanted to say on that last slide for those percentages, that's just not, to me, I'm wondering if everyone's impressed by the 60% area for any one of those measures, 62.5, 63, 66.1. They don't seem real compelling. I like to see 85s and 90s, and then I feel like, yahoo! But I'm not feeling a whole bunch about the 60. So I just thought I'd throw that out there. And I know this last speaker explained what can throw that off and contribute to it, but that was just my first impression. But that's all on this subject anyway.
All right. Thank you.
Thank
You
you.
can turn your card in over there. All right. Not at all.
I don't know know whether this is statistically relevant, but the Mid-Penn did not pass in San Mateo County. If you look at San Mateo County alone, the only way it passed was because Santa Clara County actually was the one who brought it over the 66 2/3%. So I don't know whether that's relevant. And I just feel like I wasn't sure if this last gentleman was actually working for Black Mountain because it was so glowing. And I know the devil's in the details here, and the amount of money that you guys are looking to raise is $45 million. And I think what would really be interesting to know is, first of all, two questions: whether your statistical analysis took into account how many people, in fact, did not respond, because several of my neighbors felt that the marketing survey or the survey was such a marketing piece that they just didn't respond. So the question is whether your 3.5 plus or minus % took into account how many people in fact just didn't bother to respond to the survey at all. And then secondly, what effect the difference in the amount of bond measure is going to have on the polling when people discover exactly how much it's going to affect their property taxes. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Good evening. I'm Ken Castle. I live in the White Oaks area. I think some accolades are in order for the city staff and for the council in doing this kind of outreach. I think that the consultants have indicated this is the tip of the iceberg, and this is what I sense in my neighborhood. There's quite a demographic turnover. We're going from a community of largely retirees and blue-collar construction people to one of new young families from technology areas, and they're looking for, they already found what they feel is a little paradise in San Carlos, kind of undiscovered, now being discovered, and it really intrigues them. And when you talk to these new people, and probably about 25% of our neighborhoods turned over recently, when they see that we don't have a community center, like the rest of the peninsula cities do, and we don't have a lot of big park space like some of the other communities do. And here's an opportunity with a historic foundation that can really put San Carlos on the map. I think the devil is in the details in terms of how this is put out to the public, what kind of engagement we have. Obviously, social media is going to play a bigger part, a lot of door-to-door. It's going to be important if you guys go for this to reach out that way. I think that the surveys are very positive, and yes, there are different ways you can ask questions, and until you get out and have a plan and tell people what we're looking to do here. I think the very enthusiastic people will become more enthusiastic, and the whole idea is to make people in every block, every neighborhood advocates for this. So I would hope that you feel this is good information. It's very solid. It's enough to start the ball rolling, and let's go for it. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Ken. All right. Is there anyone else who would like to speak? Yes, ma'am.
I'm Meg Marnell, and we've lived here for 25 years on Loma Road. So I have a question about the survey. First of all, we're very enthusiastic and hope it can happen. But I would have liked to see standard deviations on those items that all set close to 1, so that maybe we'd have some more sense of, are there issues where there's that response bias toward the center point. And if we could learn a little more from it in terms of trying to move that. It's squeaky tight when you look at the other measures that just go to 68%, and we need a 2/3 vote. So there are issues like, we can talk about people's enthusiasm, but do San Carlins get out and vote? And is it the antis who will show up? And so what can we do about getting the people who are in favor to show up? That's all.
Okay, thank you. All right. Is there anyone else who'd like to come up and speak? Okay. Well, I guess we've probably got a couple seconds here. What I would like to find out is we do have a couple questions, and Brian and Jared, maybe you could respond to that. One was Sandy, right? She had a question on, how many people did not respond because there was whatever their perception was of the survey itself?
Non-response is endemic in surveys. We call and email thousands of people. In fact, here we had a voter universe of 8,000. We probably communicated in one way or another with 6,000. So non-response is not an issue because the survey the sample is stratified by a whole variety of different demographic pieces of information that we know from the voter file, including age, gender, part of town, ethnic surname, partisanship, as well as voting behavior. So voting behavior is calculated into all of that. And we were projecting the likely turnout. So I don't see non-response as an issue because of the stratifications in the sampling strategy. It's not relevant.
All right. Anything to add, Jared?
Yeah, I would just add on the mailback surveys, the response rate of getting that many postcards or online participants in response to a mailer like that, again, it's just a massive, anybody who's got any kind of experience in sort of direct mail type marketing outreach, you're ahead by a 0 or more of the percent response back you would normally expect for that kind of outreach. So, certainly, are there people who didn't return it? Obviously, the vast majority of people don't, but to get, 10% or 8% of people to get a mailer and actually go online or send a postcard back is a massive, increase above what you'd normally expect from a direct, appeal like that for participation. And, historically when we've done these, and we do them in lots of places, obviously the vast majority of people don't return them, and then the people that do, raise issues and say things, but it's very, very rare. In fact, I can't off the top of my head think of an instance where somebody brought up something later on during a campaign that wasn't brought up during one of the mailback surveys or that, came up earlier in the process.
Right.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
Can I just follow up briefly? If I understood that question correctly, I think part of what it was getting at is a potential source of bias of people who chose not to participate in the survey because they, whatever reason, felt it was a slanted process. And Brian, I suspect you go to great trouble to include those types of things in your error bars. That's where part of where the error bars come from. So one way of testing this is, what's your experience with your error bars ending up being incorrect? In other words, either on the positive side or the negative side, you establish a band and then the actual results come out outside of that.
I mean, the nice thing about doing this kind of work is you get to find out if you're right. Because they're elections. We've had over 300 of them that we've recommended be on the ballot, and we've won 95% of them. And so
within your prediction. Okay.
Okay, Matt?
Yeah, I just had a question, somewhat relates to Sandy's. In my household, we received 3 opportunities to survey because of the registered voters in my household. And none of them were sent back. And in part, it's because I felt like, especially for the one that came to me, I felt like, I don't want to respond to this. I have to put my personal information at the bottom, and then, that as a council member seems a little strange. So I didn't respond. But I kind of wonder about this bias we're talking about that might have been in the postcard, the mail-out surveys, people feeling like the way I did, I don't want to put down my name and phone number. I don't vote that way. When I vote, it's anonymous. But you're asking me to participate in a survey and not be anonymous.
And from the scientific sample, I'm glad you didn't. All 5 of you. You're super informed, and while you represent the community, you're not representative of the community, if you understand this nuance there. So from that perspective, I'm glad you didn't. But your demographic is represented in our scientific survey. I'll let Jared comment on the mail-out survey.
Yeah, we did get lots of anonymous responses. I mean, people are able to put their personal information in if they wanted to continue getting information. And so, we did, again, another surprising element of this is that of the, 1,000 responses we got, a massive majority of them actually included personal information, which normally, as you point out, they don't. And, anybody can post the postcards, pre-addressed to City Hall, but didn't require, you can just write whatever you want on it, put it in the mail, it's going to get here, we're going to type in whatever is said. And online also, there's a space for comments. People are able to enter comments they're not required to put their personal information. So we did get lots of anonymous, but again, it was interesting how many people really felt like, yeah, I really do want to put my name on this because it's very interesting to me. And that was another thing that kind of stood out about this process.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. And I think that, was it Meg had the question about the standard deviation in the survey?
Yeah, standard deviation on that particular measure is not something we use. It does measure intensity, and that's what the rankings are designed to do. I think the error rate that we talked about, the 3.85% is a better way of looking at the range that the response might be, and that translates into about a 0.2 difference on that particular scale. But as I said, many of those things were in the mid-60s, so 65% plus or minus 4% in round numbers, as high as 69, as low as 61. So that's the range that we're looking in. It's not a standard deviation, but I think it's a more appropriate methodology. When we drill down into the crosstabs and look at a variety of different subsegments, we use z-tests and t-tests, which we didn't have here today. And again, there weren't many significant differences that we saw, in response to Mark's earlier question.
Okay. All right. Thank you both. Any other? I don't see any lights on. Don't see anybody else who'd like to speak. We'd like to remind everybody that Monday night, this is on the agenda for us to make a decision, a preliminary decision. So there will be a number of other items on Monday night's agenda, but this will be probably the highlight issue. So, and with that, I believe we are adjourned.